Hey, it's Anna and welcome to another bookish video. I am so frozen cold right now. It is taking everything in me not to like pull the hood up and tie it tight while we're talking, but I'm going to hold off on doing that. But if you see any violent shivers happening, don't text, don't talk about it. I love talking about books that I love, and so therefore I'm very excited for this video in which I'm going to be talking about the best books that I read in 2022, aka the best books of 2022 in my opinion, because obviously everything on this channel is going to be in my opinion. Unfortunately, I only have a few of them still with me because I own them. The other ones were library reads, so they are not with us right now, but I'll be putting the covers on screen so you can see, identify, and recognize, because obviously I'm going to encourage you to read every single one of these books. That's why they're making this video. These 10 books that I'll be talking about are in no particular order within themselves, and you would have heard me mention each of them a little bit if you watched my 2 previous videos on this little booktube channel so far, especially the first book that we're going to be talking about, which is The Riviera House by Natasha Lester. This is the single only book this year that made a physical tear fall out of my eye. There were a couple books I read that had little pinpricks of emotion feeling, but this one caused an actual physical tear to come out. It was on a vlog. And it also reignited a love, or at least it forced me to reckon with my love of historical fiction. But if you are not someone who tends to be drawn towards historical fiction, that is okay, because half of this book is historical fiction and the other half occurs in present day. I know, dual timelines that just tie together perfectly. But in one of the timelines, we are in Paris in 1939 and you get to follow Eliane. She is playing a dangerous game under the guise of just being a dumb little woman cataloging art in a museum that has been taken over by the Nazis. Nazi officials do not know that she is secretly decoding their messages and cataloging all of the art that they are stealing and smuggling that information back to the resistance. We get to meet her before the war has really changed her life and watch how it changes her life and in what ways. Having once been betrayed by the man who she loved, Eliane is faced with the decision of if she can trust him with her secrets again, and then coerced into accompanying some Nazi men on a little weekend trip to a house on the French Riviera. Tensions rise for Eliane. So all of that is happening, but then at the same time in the book, we get to follow present day Remy, who is wanting to forget the tragedy that left her life really in shambles and takes a little escape to a house that she inherited on the French Riviera. She owns a vintage fashion business that she's working remotely while there. There's a family of neighbors right next to her that she may or may not get a little interested in. But also she discovers a catalog of art that was stolen during World War II by the Nazis and sees a painting that is hung on her childhood bedroom wall for as long as she can remember. So while trying to escape from the serious parts of life that have changed her, Remy has to find out who was her family really, and is she able to face the secrets that are held within this French Riviera house. Each of these timelines tells such a beautiful story that I would have read each of them as an individual book, but the fact that they both exist in one book and then are perfectly tied together with a slow trickle of information that just keeps you hooked and falling in love with the characters as you do so. This book, like I said, forced me to reckon with the fact that I love historical fiction. And I think despite having the same premise as a few other books, you know, women in the resistance, living in Paris, this one really is a standout among the others. It was 5 stars, if that's not obvious. And it was in my top 2 favorite books of the year. It was the second one, but it was top 2. Coming up next, we have 28 Summers, the hardcover of which I actually purchased for $2 at Half Price Books. Without even knowing like what the book was, I didn't know who Elin Hilderbrand was at the time, so I don't know how I stumbled upon that good fortune, but very lucky that I did. 28 Summers follows 28 different years of the same character's life. In the summer of 1993, Mallory lets her brother Cooper host his bachelor party at a beachside Nantucket cottage that Mallory had just inherited. During this weekend, Mallory meets Jake McCloud, and a bond forms that will last decades. This book explores the agony and the romance of having a 1 weekend a year affair over 28 years. It shows us the way that this relationship both complicates and enriches Mallory and Jake's lives and the lives of the people that they love. So something that really hooked me in this one is just getting to see characters throughout so many years. Like we met Mallory when she was young and in her 20s, and then we get to follow her to the end. Very much an escapist book, kind of like a lot of Elin Hilderbrand's are, in that you feel like you are there. It may convince you to go on Zillow to see what's available to buy in Nantucket right now. They're expensive, I've looked. But it is different from a typical romance in its complexities and its moral conflicts, but you fall in love with the characters just the same. Next, we have my #1 book of the year, Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Imagine the typical book trope of someone who is a hard-working, busy hustler in New York City, and then they take a vacation, whether they're forced into it, or their car breaks down somewhere, or they just decide they need a break from the hustle and bustle of the city, and they go to some small town, and while there they meet a love interest who is just so cute and sweet and has a family business and probably bakes homemade pies. And this uptight New York person decides that they're going to leave their uptight New York partner and change their life, go to the small town, live there happily ever after. Remember that uptight New York partner? That's who Nora is, our main character. She is a publishing agent known as the Shark in New York City and absolutely loves her job. And in the beginning scenes of the book, she meets Charlie, who is a book editor, and they really get off on the wrong foot. It's an awful meeting where Charlie tells her that he really dislikes the book that she's trying to get him to edit, and they go their separate ways. Fast forward to a few years later, that book has become a bestseller. Nora and her sister Libby take a trip to the small town that the book takes place in, and you'll never guess who they meet there. This is a romance book with the side focus of exploring sister relationship too. It's not too deep or emotional of a book, it's pretty lighthearted, but there were so many good lines in there about meeting people and knowing people and loving books. It's a bookish book, so if you love books, you'll definitely connect with these characters in a type of way. And even something that I loved about this book is the fact that even though Nora is portrayed as this hardworking woman, the book doesn't force her to change. Like whenever she falls in love, it's not like, oh, and now she realizes that she's found the person she's always meant to be with, and she doesn't have to be so cold-hearted and spend so many hours at her job. Like it praises her for her strengths and what she's good at and what she values, which I just really liked reading about. This was the first book ever that I was reading a library copy of and was tempted to buy the actual book myself to own and hold and annotate and highlight and underline while I was reading it, because there were just so many good lines in it. I felt like it was the kind of book where I wanted to read it slow so that I wouldn't have it finished, and it had me hooked on the end because I was so hoping for a happy ending, but I didn't know how they were going to do it, and the ending is not one that I would have expected. And I have ordered Emily Henry's 2023 release, pre-ordered it, and I definitely suggest that you read Book Lovers as well. The next book is The Woman They Could Not Silence by Kate Moore. One Woman, Her Incredible Fight for Freedom, and the Men Who Tried to Make Her Disappear. This book is about a real woman. Elizabeth Packard is real, and it includes newspaper articles, parts of her journal, and also narrative that you can tell the author has spent a lot of time putting and piecing all together so that it reads as if it's a novel, like it's a whole storyline while also being true. But picture 1860s Illinois. Elizabeth Packard is a housewife, and her husband is plotting against her because he feels increasingly threatened by Elizabeth's intelligence, her intellect, her opinion, her comfort with voicing her opinions, and so he has her committed to an insane asylum. In this thick book that honestly read very fast and I never wished was shorter, we follow Elizabeth before all of this. We follow her years in the insane asylum. We follow the relationships that she makes. We follow what she witnesses while she's there. We follow her fight for freedom, which is constantly bogged down by the fact that she was a woman, and if her husband said she was insane, then people weren't willing to hear her own opinion on it. Something that I loved in this book too is that in Elizabeth's journals that she wrote how she wished that her story would last beyond her life and would have like a lasting impact. And so I just think it was so cool being able to read this book and think like, I'm reading this journal right now. So when she was writing it, she had no idea where it would go or who would hear her story or what impact she would have or what change she would cause. And here I was in 2022 reading it, hearing her story, giving voice to her pain, and also amplifying the change that she was able to make. This one, it is nonfiction, but I think that if you don't typically enjoy nonfiction, I think that you still really could enjoy it because it does read like a regular novel. And it does include commentary too on mental health and the fact that Elizabeth was receiving the help that she was deemed to need, even though she wasn't struggling in the ways that they said she was struggling in. But the people who did have mental health diagnoses at the time also did not belong in that asylum or were not benefiting from that asylum, and you really get a deep view into a lot of the mistreatment that happened in those types of facilities and honestly has not gone away fully today. So very interesting book, very thought-provoking, highly recommend. Next we have Elin Hilderbrand's 2022 release, which was The Hotel Nantucket. After a tragic fire in 1922 that killed Grace Hadley, a 19-year-old chambermaid, The Hotel Nantucket descended from a Gilded Age gym to a mediocre budget-friendly lodge and eventually was just an abandoned eyesore on the island. Enter Xavier Darling, a billionaire from London who decides that he is going to buy the hotel and he is going to restore it as one of the top most sought after hotels on Nantucket. Lisbeth Keaton is who Xavier hires to be the general manager. She has just gone through a breakup where she found out that her longtime partner had been cheating on her. She is trying to revamp her life, and she takes a chance on this new job. She is able to pull together a staff of lots of various diverse characters with all sorts of different personalities and quirks and backgrounds and goals and secrets. And we get to follow their entire journey as the hotel opens, as it opens its doors to new guests, as it faces challenges, as the staff face challenges, and as Grace, you remember the 19-year-old that was killed, causes some shenanigans of her own. I just think this was a wonderful novel to read. Every character you either love or you're at least intrigued by, interested in. It's told from various points of view, so you kind of just get like a holistic picture inside this hotel in this small town and the personal lives of the people who come across it. Next best book of 2022 was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, a book that changed my reading trajectory by introducing me and totally selling me on like thriller/horror genres. Maybe not totally selling me, mostly on thriller. How about that? Horror still freaks me out sometimes. But 25 years ago, Maggie Holt and her parents moved into a huge Victorian house in the middle of the Vermont woods. Based on some strange occurrences that allegedly happened while they were living there, Maggie's father wrote a book, think like Amityville Horror, dictating their time that they lived in that house. Maggie was too young to remember most of it and was pretty skeptical about the truth behind what her father said happened. And when her father passes away, she inherits Bainbury Hall, this house. Home renovating is her thing, so she's thinking, okay, cool, I'll go in, I'll renovate it. But she is met with people from the past, memories from the past, and some strange happenings that start to resemble some of what her dad said. So Maggie is put in a place of trying to discover what is real, what was fake, what really went on when she lived in that house when she was young, and what drove them to move out. This book is told in alternating chapters between us following Maggie's narrative and the book that her dad wrote from 25 years ago. So that's pretty cool as well. But I was hooked. There were some twists, there were some turns that I just did not know where we were going, and ultimately it was a very enjoyable read. And it was a good introduction into like thriller horror type books because it wasn't too scary, but I did feel a little thrill as I was reading it. Next comes a book that is definitely a must read, and I've already spent a bit of time talking about in other videos, but that is Redeeming Justice by Jarrett Adams. This is a memoir of Jarrett Adams' life. He's a real guy, and when he was 17, he was sentenced to 28 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit. He had two co-defendants that were all charged of the same crime. He got the most time out of all of them, and he was sentenced in Wisconsin by an all-white jury, a situation in which historically has obviously not worked in the favor of young black men. This memoir walks us through Jarrett as he was growing up in Chicago, what led him towards the night that he eventually was charged and sentenced for, the experience of his trial, his experience in county jails, his experience through prisons, including supermax prisons, and how he was able to find a role in prison, helping others with their court cases and eventually fighting way harder than he should have had to eventually get himself exonerated. And his story did not end there, because then he even went on to become a lawyer to help others who are in the situation that he was in. It's an unforgettable memoir. It really is an intimate look into his life. Like, he just opened the doors to let us in a way of sharing his story, because he is not the only one that has experienced that at the hands of the American justice system. So if you love memoirs, you'll definitely love it. If you're someone who doesn't typically love memoirs, it's written in a very easily digestible, fast-paced way that I think you'll still be hooked and very intrigued, and I think it will be an enjoyable read, really, for anyone. Honestly, should be a required read. The next recommendation, or best book of 2022, is Wake by Shelley Burr, and I actually got a little advanced reader's copy of this one, which made me feel so fun and special. But this is a crime novel that takes place in the outback of Australia in a teeny tiny town, and our main character is Mina McCreary, whose life has been really defined at this point by the disappearance of her twin sister, Evelyn McCreary, 19 years ago. So Mina still lives in the house that they used to live in. She really doesn't get out much. She's pretty isolated. She's going through the trauma, obviously, of losing your twin sister, and trauma that doesn't disappear even after 19 years. And her sister was never found. It's a cold case that the family never got closure for, but that did not stop her mom from writing books, doing TV appearances, and it was a very high-profile case that Mina is living with the remnants of. Enter Lane Holland, a private investigator from out of town, who, despite the pushback, is able to convince Mina to let him take a crack at this cold case and reopen it and try to find out what really happened to Mina's sister Evelyn. However, we're kind of let in on the fact that Lane has some darker motivations involved, and what becomes his obsession with the case will ultimately lead to both of their lives being in danger. This is a debut novel. Like, this is the first book that she wrote, and it is so good. Like, I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, did not know where we were going, but was so entranced. The truth will not stay buried. Big loves. Read this book. This is our second to last best book of 2022, but that is Alias Emma by Ava Glass. Nothing about Emma Makepeace is real, not even her name. Alias Emma is a fast-paced, thrilling book that takes place over just the course of 12 hours, and we get to follow Emma Makepeace, who is a new secret agent on her very first major assignment. She is tasked with traveling under the radar across London and bringing the son of Russian dissidents safely into protective custody. However, some challenges arrive. Number one, the fact that he doesn't feel like he's in any kind of danger and does not want to go into protective custody. And that's not even to mention the highly trained assassins that are hot on both of their trails. Just when things get tough, Emma's handler, like her manager, falls completely silent, goes dark. No contact is being made. Emma is on her own for this mission, and just one wrong move could get both of them killed. It was so fast-paced. It very much, and I've said this before, is the vibes of, picture a small dark room with one of the little light bulbs hanging across, and there's one of those little manila folders and it has confidential written big on it, and someone slides it across the table and is like, this is your next mission. That's what this book feels like, and I loved it. I loved it. Lastly, but definitely not worstly, what's that phrase? What is that phrase? Last but not worst. Last but not least. I think that's what I was going for. Last but not least. These Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. I just finished this book very recently, and it was very different than I had thought that it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like thriller, scary, because the cover shows, an isolated little cabin, but it's a little bit different than that, but very good. It surprised me in a very great way. So for 8 years, Cooper and his young daughter Finch have been living off the grid in total isolation in a tiny remote cabin in the Appalachian woods. And that's exactly the way that Cooper wants it, because he has got a lot to hide. Finch has been raised on the books that fill the cabin shelf and the beautiful but brutal code of life in the wilderness. However, Finch is starting to push back against Cooper's isolated way of life, and he is still haunted by the painful truth of what it took to get them there and why they must remain in that cabin. This book explores so much. It is a wonderful, slow trickle of information where you get just enough breadcrumbs to keep you hooked while not really even knowing fully everything until the end of the book. The writing made you feel as if you were in the woods with them in a very beautiful way, like being snowed in and the warmth of the fire and making soup and making hot chocolate to then snow melting and flowers first popping up for spring. Like, you get to feel all of that with them. This is another one that might get you on Zillow looking for tiny isolated cabins in the mountains of Appalachia. Probably don't do that. Probably don't do that. But this book might convince you. This one I did not cry for, but I did get a little pinprick of a tear at page 253. So if you read the book, once you reach page 253, you can know which moment it was that was really pulling my heartstrings real deep. Let me know which of these books you are interested in reading, or if you agreed that any of them you've already read and you really liked as well, or if you disagree, if you think our reading tastes are totally different. I would love to hear in the comments below. If you like this video, obviously like it. If you like the creator of this video, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for being here, for spending a few minutes of your day with me. Happy reading, and I will see you next time.